important to remember and celebrate our ancestors because that's how we explain ourselves to ourselves and to the world. Without this important link, I think we are untethered people.
Excuse me for 1 second. Brenda,
yes.
Hold on 1 second. I want you to start over. Brenda, is that light too much on him?
I'm not even concerned about that.
Well, I am. I mean, if it can be better because it's shining directly.
I was just glad his voice was there.
Yeah, that's better. That's better. Yeah.
Okay. And I think it's important to remember and celebrate our ancestors because this is how we explain ourselves to ourselves and to the world. Without that important link, we are untethered people. Celebrating our ancestors is the link, as the anchor to the beginning of our American identity. So yes, we need to celebrate and to remember our ancestors. Y'all all know, I know y'all know the story very well. We lost everything over the last 400 years. We lost everything to the barbarians. We lost our homeland. We lost our languages. We lost our religions. We lost our rituals and customs. We lost our culture. We even lost the drum. But we didn't lose our creativity. We are a creative people. And it's that creativity that has helped us to survive to some of the most horrendous situations one can imagine. Slavery was a terrible, terrible thing. And so I've got a theory on what it was that became the foundation of our survival. And I've put that in America. And here's the poem. The History of New Music in America. The first Africans upon the slave ships destined for the Americas sensed the coming of a great and lasting catastrophe. They had nothing that would protect and fortify them from the coming centuries of bondage and tyranny. So they sent out an exalted wail, beseeching God's mercy. God looked down on them and saw that they had nothing. They were naked and in chains. God, in his singular wisdom, took the very sound of their lament and turned it into their shield and their weapon. And today we call that sound music. It is those majestic wails, those cries of despair, that music in its ever-changing form, from field hollows to hip-hop, that has nourished our spirit through the centuries. A sound that spoke directly to on high for substance to keep the spirits unyielding to the horrors of shackled burdens. Feeble and conquered, music became our sacred shield and our consecrated weapon. And I wrote that poem once the thought came to me that the first sounds of American music was uttered on the first slave ships by the first Africans on slave ships coming to the Americas. They were from different tribes. They spoke different languages, but they all endured this horror and exuded a different feeling for the horror. And so these sounds became what we know as African American music. They went from the slave ships to the fields in the American South. They became field hollows and work songs. They carried a message on how to. Some of them carried a message on how to escape to the north and how to read the night sky to get to the freedom of the north. One song even gave the directions, gave instructions: follow the drinking gourd.
Brother Horace, that's so interesting. I like it a lot. Before you continue, can you introduce yourself? Tell our viewers about you, who you are, where you come from, what you're doing now. Thank you.
I'm Horace Mungin, and I've been writing for 55 years or so, since the beginning of the Black movement in 1965. I was born in Hollywood, South Carolina, and when I was 6 years old, my family moved to New York City, and I was fortunate enough to move on 136th Street, across the street from Old Harlem Hospital. And I went to a school called PS 89, which was across the street from the 135th Street Library, the library that was eventually named the Schomburg Library. And that library and my school partnered together in a program they call Story Hours, where after school, the first, second, and third graders were taken to the library. It was sort of like a program for working mothers, you know, to keep the children from 3 to 5. But they read these wonderful stories to us at the library. And I got a library card. And my most proudest moments that I can remember is when I walked down 136th Street with 3 or 5 library books under my arms. Can't remember ever being prouder than that. But anyway, this program was what planted the literary seed into me at a very young age. And so I started writing when I was in the military, when I was about 19 years old. I was stationed in Bamberg, Germany, and this was 1961. And in Germany, in this town, there was segregation of the black soldiers, not imposed by the Germans, but imposed by white Southern soldiers. And the black soldiers eventually started to rebel against that. And I wrote an article called Long Arm of Segregation and sent it to Ebony Magazine. This was back in 1961. Where white soldiers would beat up and humiliate any black soldiers that went to a certain section of Bamberg during the 60s. The military still sort of military was integrated because it was integrated in 1949 by President Truman. But the white soldiers tried to maintain the same kind of segregations that they had in the South, where there were two places for the soldiers, different places for the soldiers to go to. And anyway, this article I wrote, I sent it to Ebony Magazine, which was the premier black publication back in the 60s, if you all remember. And it was rejected, probably because I wasn't so good of a writer during that time. But I kept that article over these last. One of my biggest accomplishments, I think, as a writer was the establishment of Black Forum magazine in 1970. Black Forum was the writers' magazine for young black writers, and we published the works of unknown writers, and we did interviews with Mary Baraka and some of the other well-known writers of the time. Well, Black Forum, I stayed with it for about 8 years until I think 1980 or so. The Black Forum is now in a permanent exhibition at the Museum for African American Studies, African American Culture in Washington, D.C. So it was a great joy for me to go there, I think about a year and a half ago, and to see a magazine that I started being displayed there.
Wow. That's interesting. I didn't know that part of your history.
I don't hear you now.
I said that's very interesting. I didn't know that part of your history, that you were one of the founders of Black Forum magazine.
Yes. Yes. As you know, the Black Arts Movement, during the Black Arts Movement, there was all kind of black institutions being invented and coming out. Stage, screen, and musicians. They popped up all over the country. The Black Arts Movement is a movement that is very, very little noticed by not only just a lot of white people, but some black people don't even know about it. It's a movement that started in 1965 after the assassination of Malcolm X. Leroy Jones, a beat bohemian poet, seeing the danger of losing the momentum that Malcolm X had started in Black Pride. So he moved to Harlem and named himself Mary Baraka and started the Harlem Repertory Theater, where they were going to use all kinds of black aesthetics to continue the Black Pride movement that Malcolm X was talking about. Are we still together?
Yes.
Oh, yes, sir. So it's a lot to absorb. I mean, you talking history, stuff that folks are having to base their research on, but you'll bear witness to it that you were there
I
right there.
think you're coming in and out. Yes. And so you asked me before to talk a little about myself. All of that is part of me. I've gone through all of those experiences. Harlem was very well. It still has a dear spot in my heart right now. But I think when I think of Harlem, I think of the old Harlem of the 50s and 60s. But in the 60s, Harlem was a beaming bed for liberation thoughts. You know, we had bookstores and art museums and all kinds of things that expressed the Black desire for freedom and Black Black expressions. 125th Street, of course, was the heart of that. You had the Tree of Life bookstore, the Studio Museum. Not many people may not remember or may not know, started on 125th Street and Fifth Avenue on a second floor tenement house in 1976, I believe it was. And the Studio Museum was responsible for the first Harlem Book Fair, named after Mr. Meshucks, Louis Meshucks, who had a bookstore on 8th Avenue, 8th or 7th Avenue, where the Adam Clayton Powell, where the state office building is today. And that I have a poster from there too. I wish I could show it to you. Maybe I can. This is from the first Louis Meshucks. Can you see that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
This poster is 1976. What? 50-something years old. Mr. Shucks was an old activist from the Marcus Garvey days. His store was a very interesting place. He had pictures of all the Black youth in the world on the outside of the store, and he had a sign that said, "White people are the minority." And in the 60s, people didn't even think about things like that. But he
Wait,
was
now
telling the world.
who is this you're speaking about?
Mr. Louis Meshucks.
Oh, Louis Michel. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And he had a bookstore where? The bookstore was where? It was on...
Bookstore was between 125th and 126th Street and 7th Avenue.
Okay.
Yeah. And he was a Garveyite, but he was an advisor to Malcolm X during the 50s and 60s. And I started off writing with a little anti-drug book called Dope Hustlers Jazz. And I was writing poetry that sort of rhymed. And I remember going into the bookstore asking if he would handle my poetry, if we sell my poetry in his bookstore on consignment. And he went through it, thumbed through it, and he's seen some of my rhyming poems. We're back to rhyming again, because, you know, in the 60s, the newer poets, Nikki Giovanni and Don Lee and Mary Baraka, they had gone away from the poem of Langston Hughes and some of the other older poets. So Miss Michelle was happy to see that I'd rhymed the poem. It was something about chitlins and something. I can't remember the poem that well, but that made him happy, and he decided that he would take my books on there on consignment. And he was a wonderful man to talk to, very knowledgeable, and very pro African American. If I can, I'd like to talk about my new collection of poetry. It's called Notes from 1619, and it's a collection of poems that I hope I can get a white readership for. The thing about this book is that I like about this book is truth. And y'all all know that white people try to avoid any kind of unpleasant truth that dealing with the race relationship in America, from what their ancestors did to our ancestors and on up. They'll try all that information, not all of it, but lots of it is in this book. And so I'd like for them to as many of them as I can, to read this book. Because they try to avoid these facts. James Baldwin once said, what we need is White History Week. You know. And this book, 1619, is the textbook from which white history can be taught. Because of its adherence to the truth of the relationship between blacks and whites. I think whites find it uncomfortable to be connected to the barbarian that their ancestors were, and this is why they like to skip over this part of history. They don't want to deal with it. And I've got a poem that talks about that, and I'd like to read it if it's okay. It's called
Absolutely.
America. Okay. Let's start at the beginning. America has never been America. The landowners wrote some noble words on sheets of paper as a guide to the nation's behavior, but neither they nor their descendants have been able to reproduce the nobility of these sentiments expressed on paper in their legislatures, in their towns, in their cities, on their streets, in their homes, schools, churches, indeed, not even in their hearts. It was a mirage from the very beginning, maybe even a deception, a hoax, a myth, an elegantly grand dishonesty. For what happened to the indigenous people who lived here and the kidnapped African people brought here in chains was not congruent with the noble words on those sheets of paper. A deliriously schizophrenic nation traveled through the centuries, glorifying the words, exalting the words, believing in the words, bragging of a nation above all other nations, originated by the agitation of its land-owning founding fathers. Although the contradictions they lived produced carnage to all but the landowners and their tribe. And then there did come a time when the tribe was led into carnage because the landowners divided into a north-south dispute over the continuance of slavery. The robber barons gobbled up control of all wealth-producing processes and proportions of society of vacillating economical levels and social privileges contingent on tribal membership, over whom they became the all-powerful oligarchy. The oligarchy divided the riches of the nations among a tiny 1% of the population, the banks, the railroads, the oil fields, the shipping lanes, the stock market, and later the automobile, the airlines, and manufacturing. And they produced a white ruling class to oversee their kingdom and a white managing class to select who eats and to whom privileges administered. All this was done under the guise of those noble words written in a document known as the Constitution of the United States of America, bringing honor and privilege to members. But why the noble words remain only an aspiration to all else is explained with sleight of hand, hocus pocus, and unfulfilled promises of a better future. Even after the monumental failures of Reconstruction and the rise of the Ku Klux Klan, the United States restored control of the South to white supremacists. The Negro was disenfranchised and betrayed by his country, even after Negroes enlisted or was drafted in 2 world wars to preserve the sacredness of those noble words in the hopes of making them true for themselves. The oligarchy ordered the ruling class to warn Negroes against moving too fast for freedom, cautioning them of their aspirations for freedom. Even after 1919's Red Summer of lynching, they scold Negroes for wanting too much freedom. Even after Emmett Till were murdered, they bellowed too much too soon about the descent, and the ruling class white passed the edict down to the managing class whites to stifle all black attempts to bridge the gaps. One woman's refusal to give up her seat on a bus cracked open the lid on centuries-long bottled-up black frustration and erupted into a nationwide movement for black freedom. The non-violent civil rights era came to be after the Montgomery bus boycott in 1955 that elevated names like Joanne Robinson, Claudette Colvin, and Mary Louise Smith. With the spilling of blood came other victories, the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, the Equal Opportunities Commission. America seemed to be growing a conscience at the time when African Americans were awakening to the lie and beginning to disbelieve what had been said about them by white people. They were awakening to a history of themselves that gave them racial pride, racial confidence, and a racial identity. A few black men came to the notion that the problem was not of a black construction or of a black import or black ownership. The problem these handful discovered was solely because they were black. The country they lived in was constructed entirely for the security of white people. Read the Constitution, which considered them 3/5 of a human, of a person in a compromise that proportioned more legislative seats for the slave-holding southern states. 3/5 of a person from 1787 until 1865. Else they would have been slaughtered and disregarded like the native people. So the problem does not belong to the African American people. The problem persists because present-day white people don't want to confront the wickedness of their ancestors, nor the auction block, or the compromise, or the chain, or the whip and the lash, or the limbs pulled apart, or the raped girl, or the child sold off, or the young man tied all day to a tree in the sun, or the wife sold down the river, or mass lynching, or the fury of a lynch white mob, or 100 years of Jim Crow, or the death of the evil from which they spring. There is the problem, one of the white world's construction. For them to dredge up this evil would be to accept their association to it and validate their kinship with those who invented this evil. To remember this wickedness would require them to wear the cloak of inhumanity and offer an apology, and to surrender restoration to the survivors of the evil. A burden so revolting no white person can endure it. So they deny the. What's really needed here, James Baldwin once said, is White History Week. The white man needs to understand all of his history, needs to be pinned to it rather than penetrable. Otherwise, here's what happens. White evangelicals abandon God's morality and all the ethics they pretend to know from the Bible to support a decadent man whose wicked moral excess of 25 years are well documented in print, on audio tapes and videos from his own admission. White Americans voters in the biggest departure of moral judgment since slavery risk the narrow sliver of decency that keeps the country sinking altogether to support this man whose marketing promises is that he will make America great again, negating the necessity to dredge up old history. In his world, it didn't happen. He will erect a wall to create a reality so white the noble words of the founding fathers will ring true again. That's one of the poems in the book from 1619, and it's one of the poems where I say that's the textbook for white history. There are a lot of poems in there that tell white people just as in the same sort of stringent manner that they perpetrated Jim Crow and slavery. The language is just as blunt as that.
Right. I see in your press release, you say Notes to 1619 is a collection of poetry written in remembrance of one man's ancestral linkage to the arrival of the first Africans 400 years ago in what became the United States of America. It is a testimony on the prime events that shaped and propelled Black lives since Jamestown, and in that sense represents the stories of the 400 million African Americans who are descendants of enslaved people, making Notes to 1619 their narrative too. Do you want to say a little bit about that? And when was this book published? And I know you're saying you would like for it to be sort of put out there to a white audience too. Has that been happening? Have you gotten any feedback?
Well, the book is published May 5th, and copies are available on Amazon, but not in stores yet. And that's going to happen during this week this next week we're coming to. By Monday, I think they'll start distribution.
Okay.
In fact, I'm waiting for delivery myself right now for copies that I'm going to autograph or sign and send out to customers who pre-ordered. The book is published by Evening Post Books, which is, as I understand it, the owner of Post and Courier in Charleston.
Oh, okay. It's locally published.
Mm-hmm.
Uh-huh.
Yes,
so
and
a little bit about that. So again, in your press release, you're saying one reader of the unpublished manuscript asked me if I thought all white people were racist. And you're saying I was momentarily dazed because my immediate reaction was that this question was asked because this is the impression that reader arrived at from reading my poems. Share a little bit of that.
Yeah, well, actually, and I think that person that I spoke about, I didn't name him there, but it was actually the publisher himself, you know. And I knew that this book is gonna the tone of it is gonna be rough for white people. I don't know if they'll get through it or not, because it's real frank. It tells it like it is. You know, there's a poem in there called Jim Crow that just lays it out the way it was, and white people, well, if you tell them what they did to you, they think you're attacking them. They don't
you're
say,
what?
well, yeah,
They think
that
you're
you're
what?
attacking,
Okay.
yeah. And so this is the problem this book is going to encounter with white readers. Now, there's going to be a certain amount of white readers who's going to say, "Oh yeah, you know, he's absolutely right," or "This is absolutely right." But you'll have those white readers, the ones who want to avoid ueli. Ueli is a word I discovered a couple of years ago in this program I'm putting together for that's going to be at a plantation in Johnstown. I can't think of the name of it right now, but it really is a Swahili word that means truth, and they try to avoid the truth and their connection to the barbarians that enslaved our people at all costs. And if they read this book, they're gonna run across all of those things. Am I leaving you at a point where it's hard to follow?
Oh no, you have let's roll back there a second. I'm gonna put them on the screen. Just how many books have you written? We're nosy.
I think,
And what does it take to be a writer today? I mean, there are folks kicking out stuff really quickly, and some of them don't have full substance, but you've got full meat. So besides the
yeah,
poems,
I like to describe my writing as Black liberation literature. You know, I used to go to the Harlem Book Fair every year. 135th Street is a very special block for me. You know, this is where the Y is. This is where the Schomburg is, and this is where the library that I used to go when I was 9 years old, 8 years old, to after school to listen to these stories. So 135th Street, they still hold the book fair. The Harlem Book Fair is held on 135th Street, right across the street from the Schomburg. And this block is so special to me. This is where a lot of the writers, Langston Hughes included, Ralph Ellison, they came from Midwestern states, and they'd come to New York, and they'd either get a room at the Y, or they would rent a room in an apartment someplace on 135th, 134th, 134th Street. So this area is storied for literature.
can you take us down swing, hard bop, bop, and bebop?
Oh, that's my book. Yeah. I love
Yes.
music. I love all kinds of music. I grew up in the Amsterdam Projects on 62nd Street, and Thelonious Monk lived on 63rd Street, and we seen Monk all the time, and all of his true self, you know. And we'd see Miles or a bunch of other guys that would come down to Monk's house to socialize or to even rehearse. There was a playground on 63rd Street, right around the corner from where Monk lived. And on Saturday mornings, Thelonious Monk and Charlie Rouse would be up in his apartment on the third floor in 248 West 63rd Street, and they'd be rehearsing, and we'd be at the basketball court playing ball, and start listening to that music, and we would actually stop the basketball game and say, listen to what these guys are doing up here. This is the kind of neighborhood, this is the kind of way I was brought up with music. And when I was 13 and 14, the group that I hung out with, we were all like jazz people. We loved jazz music. You know, the famed 52nd Street jazz clubs were just 10 blocks away from the Amsterdam Projects. And so I like to tell people, kids our age at 13 and 14, most kids were collecting baseball cards with statistics on hit and run average and whatnot. We knew, my group, we knew who's at the Village Gate, who's at Birdland, who plays bass for miles on certain gigs or certain albums. These are kind of statistics we picked up in my group during the 60s, during the 50s and 60s. And so
Who
I
did the
took all of
artwork
them.
for the cover?
Hampton Olfus. I'm surprised you don't know him. You know, he lives in
Oh
Charleston.
yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, he
you
lives in
know
Charleston.
him. Matter of fact, we need to call him.
He is a great artist. You can go on his Facebook page and look at some of the artwork he's done. He moved from here maybe almost 2 years ago back to the DC area. But if you go to his Facebook page, you'll see some of the wonderful pieces of this guy. I'm glad in a way, I'm glad he moved because I spent all my money buying his art. My house is complete with with his artwork. He's a fabulous artist and a fabulous person. I wrote a poem for him that's in the new book too.
It's a beautiful thing.
But the jazz book is one I think anybody that likes music or anybody. I know you people are probably too young to appreciate bebop.
Come on, Horace. This is Deborah now. I'm not too. I know all about bebop.
All right, Deb.
Hard bop is you know what I really liked too.
Yeah,
some of my favorite parts of the genre. Hard bop.
Horace Silver. Hard
That's
bop.
right. Yes, yes, yes. And I grew up in Brooklyn, so you know I know all about that.
So that's what I wanted to express in this book. You know, earlier swing music was the big thing. You know, and we had a lot of great black musicians, jazz musicians who played swing music, big bands. But somehow, just like it happens today, the white bands always borrowed the music and they made the money. So the black jazz musicians in the 40s said, we got to come up with something that the white boys can't copy. You know, Bird and Diz worked on it a lot. They could feel this new movement. They could feel the new note coming out of the new way, new musical expression. But nobody had really articulated it was. Let me tell you this little story about. I've got this book about Charlie Parker, where maybe 100 different jazz musicians. The book is composed of little essays from different jazz musicians. So just said about Bird that he was developing these new notes and this new feeling of bebop. And when the things finally came to him, he came to Bird's house in Harlem, knocked on the door. But Bird came to Dizzy's house. Bird, as you know, was on drugs, and Dizzy's wife didn't want to be around him. So when he knocked the door, Dizzy, I've got the notes. So Dizzy said, "You know you can't come in here, man. You know, I think his wife's name was Gladys. She don't want you in here." So Bird stood on the outside of Dizzy Gillespie's apartment door, told him to get a pencil and a piece of paper, and he blew these new notes on the outside. You know how in some apartment buildings, how that echo occurs in the hallways?
Yes.
It was on one side of the door with a pencil and a musical sheet, and he was copying down these notes the Bird was playing on the side. This was the beginning of bebop. How it came about. Minton's Play. You know about Minton's Playhouse. They all went there after their gigs downtown. The musicians would meet at Minton's and they would what they called it, freelance just below. Mr. Minton was a jazz musician himself, but he was the first black man on in a musicians union, and so he would encourage musicians after their gigs downtown to come on up to Minton's, and they would play for free. He would give them have meals there. Minton's was famous for his fried chicken, and everybody would eat. And he was a generous man, a musician that as room rent that week. Minton would say, "Go get you something to eat at the bar there, and I got $25 to pay your rent for you." Well, he was getting free music.
Right.
So I guess he could afford to be that generous, But Minton's Playhouse is still going today under new ownership, of course. But it was the home of bebop music. And in this book, let me plug my book. And in this book, there's all the information you can think of about that creation. And there's little biographical sketch of maybe 50 of the most important bebop jazz artists of that period. Not only the artists, but people in the bebop movement that were important to it. like Pee Wee, I can't think of his last name. This who was a host at Birdland. He had this high-pitched voice. Ladies and gentlemen, we got for you tonight, Mr. Horace Silvers. There's profiles in the book on him, or on the Baroness, Jazz Baroness. This is a white woman who belongs to the Rothschild family.
Nika, yeah, Nika, right? That was,
yeah. Pananika, I can't think of her last name. She has very difficult names.
Yeah.
But her brother hipped her to Thelonious Monk right after World War II. And she decided, I've got to go to America to be amongst these people who's creating this fabulous music. And so she came to America, got hooked up with jazz musicians, and she helped them all, would argue their case when they were underpaid or was used. And big scandal. Charlie Parker died in her apartment in the 50s. She lived in a big hotel down Midtown Manhattan, and Parker was sick. You know, Charlie Parker was a great musician, but Bird was a hard person to. He wasn't kind to himself, as a way of putting it, I guess. And he was ill, and he went to her apartment, and she seen it right away. And said, "Let me call the doctor." And she called her doctor and examined Bird and said, you need to go to the hospital. But Bird refused. And this was on a Saturday. The next day, he was watching the Ed Sullivan show at the house. And while he was watching the Ed Sullivan show, he just passed away. She called the coroner. And they came and they looked at Bird, the corpse anyway, and the coroner put in his report, man, 65, dead of whatever causes was. Bird was actually 35. That's how he looked at the time. How much?
Wow.
How much he abused himself. And then this was, I don't know, 1950 something. Then in the 70s, Thelonious Monk died, not in her apartment. She had gotten a house in New Jersey, and Monk and his family lived in her house. And Monk died at her house also. Another story about the Baroness. On 64th Street in Amsterdam, there was a bar called the Century Bar. But I grew up in this neighborhood. We always called it Gunsmoke. It was a beer hall, essentially. The neighborhood guys hung out there. Well, Monk would bring the Baroness to the Century Bar. He would park Rolls Royce outside, double park a lot of times because it's on a weekend, no parking spaces were gone. They would double park a Rolls Royce on the outside of the Century Bar, and she'd go in and sit down on one of those stools and drink beer. And I mean, everybody was just flabbergasted, Look at Monk, he's here with this Rothschild woman, and they're sitting in Harry's bar drinking beer. So the Amsterdam Project was a fabulous place to live at, I tell you, back in the 50s and 60s.
Mm.
And I go back to the city 3-4 times a year, and I was there. My mother just passed a couple weeks ago on April 22nd. She still lives there. So whenever I go back to the city now, and these last years, I go to my mother's house. Sometimes I would stay there. Sometimes I stay with my son in Queens. But I feel like I'm losing my connection to that neighborhood now. I've got maybe a friend or two that still lives there. But as things goes, you get older, things change. People move in and out.
Who are some of the young musicians that you feel are keeping the tradition, that are still in the tradition? There are a few, but
I don't know many of them. Many of the names. I'm sort of still stuck in 1959, listening to old music. If you come to my house or if you get in my car, you'll hear music from 1959. But Joshua Redman is one of the newer musicians that I really like. I've got a couple of his albums, and it's really no, not albums, but you know what I'm talking about.
Yes, CDs.
CDs, yeah. I've got a couple of his, and I like Joshua Redman. He plays saxophone.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And Charleston people are doing great. Charleston jazz scene is pretty heavy. I haven't gone out and listened to any groups in maybe 10 years or so. But I'm sure that Ranky Tanky is that
yes,
the drummer.
Quentin, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, very, very, very good. So if we can, let's get back to 1619 for a minute. Is there anything else that you want to tell us about that? About how, you conceived it, or is there another poem that you would like to read from that?
I'd like from the book.
Yes.
I have. I was hoping you'd have time for me to read. It's called Culprit. I'll read a couple of pages of it because it's kind of lengthy. But I sort of classified decades and what happened and what was the dominant theme of that decade, And the 90s for me, the 90s were blame it on. I call the 90s blame it on the black guy decade. White people would kill somebody or they would do crazy things, and they don't. Here's how I get off, at least temporarily. I'll tell the police that a black guy did it, and it's so believable. They believe anything that a black person is accused of that's bad. And so there was so many high profile cases of that in the 90s. I thought, let me write about this. So I have a story I call The Culprit, the Phantom Culprit, and I'd like to read a couple of pages for that if it's okay. And it goes, I have a face that is known around the world, but I'm most infamous in the United States of America. It is there that I was born untold years ago, and it is there that I am promulgated and nurtured. I am as much a symbol of the American culture as baseball, but my appearances aren't seasonal. I am ordained whenever the need arises. A young white mother in South Carolina drowned her 2 sons by rolling her car into a lake. In her attempts to absolve herself of any blame, she lied that a black man had carjacked her children. She gave the police sketch artist a description of me, and for days in front of television cameras, she tearfully pleaded that I should return her children. That sketch appeared in newspapers and television newscasters around the world. I was once again boldly resurrected. One morning, a powerful white New York politician parked his car on the Manhattan side of the East River with a panoramic view of the industrial section of the borough of Queens. Then this important official shot himself in an attempt to divert attention from his corruption and perhaps from the despair disclosure would bring. It was I who he fingered from his hospital bed. I shot him, he said, in an attempt to rob him. He bravely resisted, he lied. The picture of his empty car.
Hold on, Mr. Mungin, 1 second. Mr. Mungin, 1 second. You're breaking up for some reason. You're breaking up. Yeah, getting a lot of static. Still staticky. Can you go out and come back in for me? Boom. That man a wealth of knowledge. I was trying to get Hampton to sneak up on him, but I can't reach
that was, and I wasn't even aware that Hampton had left town.
Oh yeah, I knew he did. And Al Frazier's in the middle of something because he was on that bebop conversation. And then I see I'm gonna have to edit this one, but that's such his life. Yeah. There's not a whole lot of edit.
There's no doubt about that. He's done good work.
Trying to get him because he's an intersector. But
and he's an elder. He's an elder, so that's nice to have him on there. We can have him when he wraps up talk about honoring Hampton.
I found the number. I found the number, Lord.
For who? Hampton or for her?
Yep, for Hampton.
That would be great if he'll come on. You gonna call him?
I'm calling him now. Voicemail. People don't. Everybody's supposed to be home. What is it?
Text them.
That's all.
Text them and see. Sometimes people will.
No, not a texture.
Oh.
I tried. And that's on his art page. I'd already called him through Messenger,
okay,
left him a message. Nope, they not effectively communicating. Yeah, at least Alfredo answered the phone.
But he was busy?
Yeah. Remember, he's got an Airbnb.
Oh,
so when he says
well, yeah. Al, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right. I think maybe his battery might have been dying or something. Come on, man. You came in once. Come on in.
Either that or his phone was ringing or something. Because he is on his phone, you know.
Mm-hmm. But that was serious. Oh, excuse me. And playing over there, playing in Zoom, because she kept coming in. I kept getting these emails. I'm like, I didn't set any meetings, so I set in. Well, now I know what to do for us if we need it in the back end. I set in a room that runs 12 hours.
Oh,
literally runs 12 hours. All right, come on back. Oh, excuse me.
Did you make your porridge?
Oh, heck
good?
Yeah. Man, listen.
Is that Horace? Is that a picture of him? Who is that? Oh, that's
yeah. I don't know. He got to go back over this black art section.
Let's revisit that too.
He skid over some names like it wasn't nothing. I'm like, no, brother.
And as far as Black Forum magazine, that was one of my favorite magazines back in the day. I didn't know he was the one, like a founding member. That's deep right there. Uh-oh, look at Horace.
See, that was layout back in the day. That's how this goes. Look at this art, plain, simple artwork by Mary McCabe. Hey, come on, man. New School of Social Research, that was a spot.
Right. Yeah, look at, you know, and I had a lot of those books right there that he's talking about. I gave them all to the library in Liberia. All of those books that's up there, those pamphlets that they were back then. We were doing a lot of pamphlets. Poetry, you know, Don Lee and Nikki Giovanni and Sonia Sanchez and, you know, all of them. Wow. Look at that. Nice. Black Pride, yeah. Homecoming, I had that.
Many Voices of a Black Woman. See, this alone, you don't see stuff like this.
Yes. Now. Oh, Black Judgment by Nikki Giovanni. I had that. Think Black, I had that. All of those, yeah.
Black Feeling, Black Talk, Soul and Tears, Dope Hustler Jazz, Wings Will Not Be Broken, See Now Here, man, listen. Cities Burning, Black Impulse, Homecoming, yeah. That's a whole other world. Wait, did he pop back in? He didn't pop back in yet.
Well, he got here on time before. Well, I'm trying to.
He back in.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
No problem.
No problem. We were here being educated because see, you're gonna have to tell us about some of these things here. We went down into the
Your battery died?
I knew that.
Yeah.
I knew that.
I got it plugged in now. This is a brand new phone, so the battery should have lasted all day.
Well, this is pulling a lot of power.
Oh, that's right. Normally it lasts. I charge it every 24 hours or so.
This is pulling a lot of power. Well, Horace, this is going very, very well. So Brenda is gonna want to she's gonna want you to talk a little. Well, you finished that. You're gonna redo that poem, and then we want to get back into the Black arts movement and a little bit of that. Yeah.
All right.
So you can restart that. You can restart that piece that you started reading.
Okay, that's called The Culprit, and I'll start reading that. I have a face that is known around the world, but I'm most infamous in the United States of America. It is there that I was born untold years ago, and it is there that I am promulgated and nurtured. I am as much a symbol of American culture as baseball, but my appearances aren't seasonal. I am ordained whenever the need arises. A young white mother in South Carolina drowned her 2 sons by rolling her car into a lake. In her attempts to absorb herself of any blame in the crime, she lied that a black man had carjacked her children. She gave the police sketch artist a description of me, and for days in front of television cameras, she tearfully pleaded that I should return her children. That sketch appeared in newspapers and television newscasts around the world. I was once again boldly resurrected. One day, a powerful white New York politician parks his car on the west side of the East River with a panoramic view of the industrial section of the borough of Queens. Then this important official shot himself in an attempt to divert public attention from his corruption and perhaps from the despair disclosure would bring. It was I whom he fingered from his hospital bed. I shot him, he said, in an attempt to rob him. He bravely resisted, he lied. The picture of his empty car parked at the spot of the shooting was shown on television for a week with an appeal for information that would lead to the arrest of a shadowy black figure fitting my description. An unfaithful young husband in Boston drove his wife he no longer wanted, who was pregnant with a baby boy he had not desired, atop an unkept bridge in a black neighborhood, then shot them dead. He knew that this was a prime location from which to launch his fabrication. He also knew what description to give in order to set the Boston Police Department on the lookout for me. The hunt began as it has for hundreds of years, with compelling zeal. That I am a convenient and believable scapegoat for white people with sinister motives due to no fault of my own is at the heart of my story, and is also a symptom of an increasing white illness. I tell my story in the protest style of the old Negro writers of the Renaissance, because so many people now proclaim that the time for that kind of protest has long passed. I disagree. How can the time for protest have passed when the reason for protest has not? White people still find it easy to believe that I did it, whatever the it may be, because they know human nature. For half of the time I've been with them on this continent, they have denied my humanity. But now they accept and fear the reality that my instincts are indeed human ones. And knowing human nature as they do, they reason that if my instincts are human, I would want to kill them for all they have suffered upon me. They know that this is how they would react had the shoe been on the other foot. And in this sense, they inadvertently allow that I am the same as they. Whenever the alarm goes out for my arrest, they suspect that I'm striking back at them, and as they would do for the centuries of harm they have heaped on me. Then there's this murky distinction between that part of me that is unreal, figment of their minds, and real Black Americans exist. They confuse us for each other. They mix and match us whenever it's to their convenience. That I am not real sometimes escape even me. I find myself referring to the real Black people as me. It's a handy sociological tool that bridges the distinction between reality and expectancy. This is exactly my problem. White people's expectation that I will retaliate for what they have done to me allows them to believe that I would kidnap children, shoot a powerful politician, kill a pregnant woman, rape a hotel clerk, molest young boys, or even worse. I might want to share equally in the abundance of American life. It is that fact that they unconsciously anticipate the day when I will rise up to make amends and keep my portrait at the ready in their minds. They have a collective expectation in a single image of me in their individual mind. Why else would a white woman in an elevator with a rich and famous Black man fear for her pocketbook? She has perfect vision, but it's not with her eyes that she observed this man. She views him through the filter of her guilt and her fear. She knows that he should make an attempt to even the score, and she thinks this is an opportunity. The fear blinds her. She thinks he's me, the culprit. That one black man all white people carry around in their heads. Now, it's only fair that I point out that when I say all whites, I don't literally mean all whites, but only that amount which gives the statement accuracy. This means that there are some whom I've maligned. You know who you are. I beg your pardon. Here is how I'm most often described. I have a long face with full lips, a broad nose, sinister cheeks, and menacing eyes. I'm brown skinned. I'm sometimes drawn wearing a knit hat that was popularized in cartoon depictions of a second-story man wearing black mask, carrying a long flashlight and a sack of loot. I resemble no other black man in America, yet every black man in America can be mistaken for me, and many have fallen to this misfortune. It takes very little for those who describe me to verbally transmit my facial likeness to those whose fingers produce my image. Because I am an exact figment of both of their imaginations. I am a figment of the imagination of every white person in America. Whether I'm tall or maybe just a midget is not known. It isn't even known if I have all my limbs. Menace that I am, I may have 4 arms and legs and thorns for fingers. And as elusive as I've been, I might have wings that enable me to swiftly perform my geographical gymnastics. I find it humbling that I have never been given a proper name, a situation that sometimes makes it hard for me to grasp the reality of my existence. For the sake of this narration, let's everyone call me Leroy. Don't make that Leroy the culprit. Even that doesn't sit just right. How about Leroy the phantom culprit? Yes, now that has a certain ring of truth to it. Aha, you say. Now you know who I am. I'm not really a person, I'm a tool. It used to be that many white policemen in big northern cities learned to carry an extra pistol or a knife and went with them. If they were ever involved in an unjustified shooting death of a black person, that extra knife or pistol became evidence to exonerate the policeman and justify the killing. I condemn the North for this practice, but in many areas of the country, this wasn't even a necessary nuisance. These are the tools white policemen use to protect and guide their careers in law enforcement. I am the tool white people utilize as subterfuge for the horrors they commit. Personally, I don't mind it for myself, but it does cause a lot of disruption and unpleasantness to black communities and among black people. Many black men have died in my stead, many of them while profusely proclaiming their innocence, and many of them while plainly innocent to officials and the public, or condemned for the dysfunction on the matter of race that takes place in the minds of white people. On many occasions, I've been accused of engaging in what they say is my favorite pastime, raping white women, a preeminent capital offense. And over the years, scores of innocent black men have had to pay the price in the most horrific manner. Nothing ever enrages and blinds the white man more than the accusation that I have bedded his woman, forcefully or not. I don't mind that all white people describe me in the same way. After all, if they didn't, I could not exist. The energy of my existence comes from their imagination, from the imagination of white people. It is through them that I derive my shape and form, my notoriety and my malfunction, my helplessness as well as my power. Yes, my power. Although I have cast myself as a victim, on the yang side of my weaknesses is my power. On the yin side of my power is my weakness. Slippery? Let me explain. This all happens in the collective white psychic. It is there that I am cleared. It is there that I am cleared. It is there that I am nourished and embellished. It is only there in the white mass psychic that I exist. There was a time in the South when the majority of white voters favored the Democratic Party. During the Civil Rights era, the National Democratic Party aligned itself with the movement for equal rights, a move that alienated white Southerners, to whom my imagination became iconic for the Democratic Party. For them, an intolerable association. Over a period of 3 decades, there was a massive shift of white voters to the Republican Party in order to keep the process of how best to retard the progress of Black Americans clear. The irony is that this shift has resulted in millions of white voters against their own self-interest, doing damage to their families, the political system, the country, and themselves. The South is a region of the country where even professional people work a second and third job trying to make ends meet. And yet, white people are persuaded to support policies that favor the rich simply because they are certain that these policies don't help blacks. Whenever they view the Democratic Party, they see that sketch of me, and the distortion sends them off in the wrong direction. That is the kind of power they have given me. Admittedly, it's not a direct power I possess of my own accord, rather a power that results from their folly, but power just the same. Hold on tight. I'm about to offer another concrete but equally slippery observation. Much of what they do to prevent blacks from striving forward is also detrimental to many of them. It turns out that there is an interconnectedness between them. When they flock to the Republican Party in the hundreds of thousands, they inoculate themselves from my presence. They also leave behind remedies to problems that would afflict many of them. My power lies in their attempt to leave blacks out. For many of them, the solution would ease black burdens are the same ones that would bring them comfort. If a white man in the South with 2 jobs, a working wife, 3 children, and a double-wide trailer, and a hunting dog would vote his reality, he'd favor a reduction in his payroll taxes over reduction in inheritance taxes. He'd seek a raise in minimum wage and a membership in a labor union to protect his status. But because he is encouraged to associate these issues with my image, he rejects them and imprisons himself on the outside of my cell, thinking he's better off. And there's more to that, and it comes from my book, The Devil Beats His Wife, which is a collection of 6 or 7 short stories that I felt after I moved back down south in 1989 and socialized and did whatever I needed to do to reestablish my feel for the South. When I left here, I was 6 years old. And when I returned, I was 47. So, I didn't know the South the way I know it now. So after I had been here for a while, I felt, let me write this book. It's called The Devil Beats His Wife, and it's a collection of short stories. The title comes from something I used to ask my grandmother. When my grandmother was alive, I used to come back to South Carolina every summer. I spent the entire summer with my grandmother. My mother would buy me 2 pairs of dungarees, denims, y'all call them now, and a pair of those black and white sneakers, and I'd be ready to head south, And I'd stay with my mother until the week before school reopened in New York. Then I'd go back, and then I'd go back to New York. And so I did have some knowledge of the South and the desire to return to it too. Because I grew up, where I went to was Hollywood, is where I was born at. And I didn't have many encounters with white people there, just my family. And so that's what drove me to come back south. And then another thing is that I met my wife in New York in 1963. And she's from Ridgeville, 38 minutes from Hollywood. So 2 Southerners went 800 miles at different times to meet up in New York City, and so we wound up back down here in Ridgeville in 1989 when I retired. I used to be a subway conductor. I retired from the MTA, and we built our house. Well, we built our house before we moved back, but here I am back down here, and it's been 30 years already. Yes.
You're like a walking library, I swear. And I'm glad we have the opportunity to get some of it out of you because a lot of young folks just don't know how the process is if they got access to the things that they have access to. It's amazing.
Yeah, that's good. I like to say that age and experience gives one perspective, Right now, people are saying, younger people are saying, cash is only $1.65. I said, wow, that's high. I remember when it was 39 cents. So it's perspective. You know, you live long enough, you have more to gauge things against.
What are these works here about? Now See Here Homes?
Now See Homes. When I started, I was in the Amsterdam Project. There was a lot of drug going on, and I started off as an anti-heroin writer. There was a place in my neighborhood, Thin Man's House. Everybody used to go to Thin Man's house and shoot up and get high and whatnot. I had a good friend, I won't call his name, but I used to go to Thin Man's house. I was, a regular street guy, but I just didn't use drugs. And I used to go there and pull some of my friends out of that joint, Let's go get a taste, man. Get away from there. And so my early writings were anti-drug writings. There was a group in Harlem called they modeled themselves after the Book of the Month Club. There was a Black Book of the Month Club. Winhan's brothers, the Winhan brothers. There was three of them, and they had a bookstore too on 125th Street. Anyway, they gave me I guess you call it an award or a citation for my anti-drug poems and efforts back there. That's the book you have up there now, Dope Hustlers Jazz. Yeah. But the drugs, white people now talk about the opiate crisis, but I grew up when heroin was a bad thing, not only in my neighborhood in Amsterdam Projects, but in Harlem generally, in black neighborhoods. Some good and some bad come out of it. I know a guy named Hyman Nesbitt. He was a drug user. He's a cool guy though. Hyman, I credit Hyman with the saying, or with the phrase, oh God, what is it? Getting ripped off. The guys from Amsterdam Projects on 62nd Street, Midtown Manhattan. Harlem is a whole lot different, and there was a different nuance. If you were from downtown, you were supposed to be square. You didn't know what was going on, and the guys in Harlem were hip guys, So they would take advantage of that, and so guys from my neighborhood would go to Harlem to buy their drugs, and they get taken, and so Hyman would say, "Where'd you go?" 116th Street was a bad drug area, And oh man, I went up there and we got ripped off. They got swindled, and being ripped off is sort of a metaphor for uneven, a jagged end. It's not. Hyman wouldn't say, "Oh, we got swindled," or "we got evenly teared off." He'd say, "We got ripped off." A terrible thing. And Hyman Nesbitt invented that phrase. And by the 70s, you'd hear United States congressmen saying, "The Republicans are ripping American people off." Or you hear Democrats, the Democrats are ripping the American people off. Hyman Nesbitt's phrase had made it to the highest height of political discussion. A phrase that was born on 64th Street and Amsterdam Avenue.
History. Tell us about these book covers at a time where people are actually. It was a different self-publishing world back then.
Yeah.
It's totally different. And you folks, that it's just and as a writer, you've gone through the measure of running off your own books, and to the point where now, bam, hit a manuscript in a computer, send a file off, come back with a finished product.
Take it to the bookstore, leave it on consignment, and go back in 3 weeks to see how many books have been sold. I had every bookstore in Harlem and down in Greenwich Village, and in New Jersey, there were bookstores out. Baraka had moved back to New Jersey, and there were bookstores there, and it was a way of getting your work out, It was fun though. It was really fun. 125th Street was a storied, really. Walking down 125th Street was just magical for me. This was the first time I seen Malcolm X was on 125th Street. Me and John Jordan, Earl Wilson, and a couple of guys from downtown. We went up there for some reason, and we took the train that leads you off at 125th and Lenox. So we were walking west to the west, got to about 7th Avenue. You know where that watch place was? They had a pedestal boulevard watch place on 7th Avenue, 125th. And who we see was Malcolm X. We ran up to Malcolm. He had his bodyguard, Kenyatta. I think his name was Jomo Kenyatta, after like the African freedom fighter. And he jumped in front of Malcolm and put his hand in his coat, and Malcolm had to say, "No, they're all right. They just want to say hello, you know." So he stood there in that corner and talked with us. We asked him questions, and of course he always ends, I think, every conversation with come to the mosque on 116th Street. You know, I never did that, but it was a pleasure meeting Malcolm. And other than seeing him in his speeches, you know, where you were way back, a block back away from him and all that, but this was actually handshaking kind of thing. 125th Street was magical. Are you still there? No one's listening to me.
We are listening to you. Definitely.
When you look at the current state of wokeness, if I may use the term, or folks thinking that, as they say, stay woke, is it a reawakening of what was occurring in the early 70s?
I don't see it now. I don't get out much, so I don't see it. I don't see it. Some of that's happening, but I don't see it the way it doesn't have the feel to me as it did in the 60s, you know, where everybody was trying to make a statement, you know. And the clothes we wore, you know, the dashikis and the afro kick and all that. I don't see that kind of, that's not going to happen again, no. But it could happen. This era needs to make its mark the way it needs to make its mark. It's just like copying the 60s isn't going to do it. Like that shooting in Georgia that disturbed everybody. Aubrey, I think there's a young man saying, that motivated a lot of people to start, let's do something. I mean, I've seen some Facebook comments and posts that say, oh yeah, now they're talking. It's a shame it's going to take more of that to get us together. But we need to get together. We need to. There needs to be a new kind of militancy, I suppose. And the way to do it this time is what Malcolm said in the other time is to really vote. The election is coming up in 2000 November. Is the most important election I will ever have participate in, and anybody, I guess.
Well, we still have primaries coming up soon.
Yeah, June 2nd, right? And
yeah, those got to get them local ones. Got to do the local ones.
Very important. I just found out that there's somebody running against Graham in the Republican primary. You know, I'm not a Republican. Sometimes I vote in the Republican primaries just to be mischievous, you know. But if we can knock him off in the primary, that would be great. There's a couple of people nationally I'd like to see out of politics, and he's one of them, Graham, and the guy from Kentucky, the head of the Senate, and of course Donald Trump. I'd like to see their political careers ended, and maybe even have some of them wind up in jail for what they've done. But I don't know what's going to happen.
Well, this has been really, really good. Brenda, do you have any more questions?
No, I'm fine. I enjoyed talking with y'all.
You have some parting words about honoring the ancestors for us?
That we ought to continue to do that and to really be involved and be aware of what we are American people. Those of us, Black people in this country now, the great majority of us anyway, we're the descendants of people that went through some of the most horrific acts ever perpetrated on people in the earth. We are American people, a miracle that we survived some of the things that they've been. Go on the internet and look at some of the things that these people did to our ancestors. Oh, it is just unspeakable. And always take a white friend with you. Always always tell a white friend what happened. Don't let them get off by not knowing. The Legacy Museum in Montgomery, everybody needs to go there. Everybody needs to go there. I went, I think last year, my wife went there, and had a hotel just a block away, so we spent a lot of time. The museum is divided into two parts, as you probably know. One's a traditional museum where you go in, they got some interesting exhibits. They even have holograms where you can talk with, well, not talk to them, but hear slaves talk about their condition. And then the other part is like about a mile or so away from the museum, and this is where they have these like coffin-like things hung for every person. Every person that was hung in the United States is just an acre of, I guess maybe an acre, 2 acres of tribute to people who have been hung, and they have it organized by states and counties. So you can, you are Charleston County. How many people did they hang in there? You can just go to the Charleston County section and count the names, and see cases where there were cases where whole families were hung at one time. I never knew that happened, and so that was a learning experience for me, and I depict this in this poem. I wrote this in a new book called The Summer of 1919, which was a horrific time for Black people in this country. Black soldiers were coming back from World War I, and the Black intellectuals had coined this phrase, the new Negro, meaning that these Black soldiers ain't going to come back from fighting for freedom for Europeans and have to endure the second-class citizenship in America. It wasn't going to happen. And white people, and the job situation. So white people knew that they needed to intimidate and to browbeat Black people again. And so this is what started the sensational hangings of 1919, where white people, they would bring their children with sandwiches to watch a hanging. What kind of people is that? What kind of people? Things like that. And so this poem, I have this Red Summer of 1919, ought to be read by everyone.
All right. Well, thank you so much for agreeing to participate. And we've learned so much from you today. And where can people purchase your books? Not just 1619, but all of them. Do you have a website as well?
Yeah, www.horacemunginbooks.com. www.horacemunginbooks.com. And all of the books are available right there on my own website.
Okay. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you. And I enjoyed the talk with you.
I can't let him get away. You still there, Mr. Mungin?
I'm here for a moment or two.
What's the deal with San Juan Hill?
San Juan Hill is the neighborhood I've been telling you about. That's 60th Street to 64th Street, Amsterdam Avenue to West End Avenue. You see that building on the cover of the book? Underneath that building is the Allen Ben's Luncheonette, but we kids call it Allen Ben's candy store, because that's what we bought there, candy, So I used to work there. When I was 9 years old, I used to go in Sunday morning at 4 o'clock in the morning and correlate the different sections of the newspaper. Back in the 50s, New York had maybe 20.
Yes.
And all the newspapers on Sunday would have like 3 or 4 different sections, and the sections would come to the stores in different bundles. And I'd get there in the morning, and I get the General American, and I'd put the sports sections in with the cartoons, comic section, and just get all the sections of the paper together. And at 9 o'clock, I'd restock the candy bin and the sodas and the comic rack. The kids would come back from Sunday school and from mass, and the money that their parents gave them to donate to the church, they'd come into Allen Ben's and spend buying candy and comic books. And so I would stand there. I was it gave me authority. Don't put your hand in there. What do you want? Just point and I'll get it for you. 2 baby roots. I was important, man. and I'd sell candy for Al and Ben's. Al, they were two Jewish guys. Al was a delightful man. He loved baseball. He loved Willie Mays. You know, Willie Mays used to make what they call the bread basket catch when somebody hit a fly ball, and he would run with his back towards the stadium, that part of the stadium, and running in the direction of the ball, and he would catch the ball running away from it almost, you know, and that's called a bread basket. When he made one of those, Al was happy for a week. To say, "Hey, kid," is all he would say. Ben was a different type of a guy. He drank a lot of seltzer water because he had a bad stomach, and I thought his bad stomach probably came from the fact that he was mean and didn't like baseball. But Alan Ben Candy Store played a big part in my life too. One day I'll tell you about the Alfred Hitchcock novelettes that were Alan Ben's that started me to read a lot, you know, and wanting to write the way these writers wrote in the Alfred Hitchcock novelettes, these mystery horror stories.
Yeah, so you had a murder mystery going on here. Oof. A wealth, a wealth, a wealth, a wealth, a wealth. We are indebted to you.
Well, I'm happy
Glad you
took the time to talk to this old man.
They need to hear more of it. That's part of the issue, and at least you're controlling the narrative. A lot of them are just picking up pieces and figure whatever Wiki threw together. And like we keep telling them, Wiki ain't got all the facts. You got to have bear witness statements. You have to hear it from those who lived it. And fortunately, we get to have the opportunity to. You're just a timeline of history.
Yeah, I just have to have been born that long ago, and
willing to share
the places I've been. Yeah. Did I tell you I jumped out of airplanes?
Okay.
Next time.
Oh, Mr. Mungin, have you been to the motherland?
I went to Cape Town, South Africa for my nephew's wedding in 2002.
Tabletop, huh?
Oh yeah, the Table Mountain. Yeah, we went up top of Table Mountain, and you know, South African money, the rand, I think they call it. You can't write on their money the way you do American money or carat and all that. And the thing I remember from Table Mountain, other than the beauty and the looking down at Cape Town, was very, very beautiful sight, is that I went to get something to snack on or something. I gave them a 20 rand piece. They gave me the change. And the host, my nephew's mother-in-law, I was showing her the money. She, "Oh, somebody slipped me on you. Slipped me a bill that had a little mark on it, and that bill is no good no more. You can't spend it in South Africa if it has any sort of a mark on it." I think it was like a 5 rand bill. You know, 5 rands over there was the exchange rate was I think 10 to 1, so 5 rands would be like $1.25. So out of $1.25.
Horace, you were a paratrooper?
Huh?
You were a paratrooper?
Yes. I was.
Were you a part of the ROC?
I was with the 82nd Airborne.
Okay, because my uncle was a paratrooper as well. He was with the ROC.
The ROC?
Yes. That might have been a little earlier than you.
Or a little later, maybe? I was from 60 to 63.
No, he was in there in the 40s.
Oh, okay, yeah. A little earlier.
But he was a paratrooper, though. He was with the, what was it? The 503. I'm looking at his stuff now. But yeah, that's very interesting. Okay. I
remember coming down south once. My grandmother from North Carolina, from Fayetteville, and my father, who apparently been estranged for a long time. He said, "What are you doing in there?" I said, "I'm going to jump school." He said, "You must think you white." like only white guys jumped out of airplanes, you know.
Right. Yeah. Well, there was some that were earlier in World War II.
Yeah, yeah.
And my uncle was a part of that group.
Mm-hmm.